I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does, without me lifting a finger. So I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
The New Balance Furon V8, crafted for speed, tested and worn by Bukayo Saka. Experience-engineered minimalism at its finest and fastest. We updated the Furon V8 for even faster performance on the pitch. Same ultra-lightweight, precision strike-focused design, now with even greater sense of speed. A new speed control stud supports control during sudden stops, sharp pivots, and moves used by the fastest players, like Saka himself. Step up your game in the new Furon V8. Learn more and get yours at newbalance.com/soccer.
There are some things in life that just shouldn't be forgotten, like bringing your keys when you leave the house, setting your fantasy lineup, and most importantly, having Hidden Valley Ranch to watch the game. Especially if wings are on the menu. Those creamy, zesty Cool Ranch flavors take each spicy, savory bite to an unforgettable level. Hidden Valley Ranch, only serious about flavor.
Dougie.
Sam.
Manchester United dropped out of the FA Cup last weekend, continuing their dismal, dreary season, which looks destined to end not only trophyless, but in the bottom half of the Premier League. It has prompted some accusations that Ruben Amorim has made the Red Devils even worse than they were under Erik ten Hag. So my question is simple. Is that true?
Amorim knows his system works. It's very good. It just works much better when the best players are in the best positions.
Another terrible week for Manchester United. Awful week out of the FA Cup as the holders. And it just continues to go from worse to worse for Manchester United.
We are getting a new coach that is losing more than the last coach. I have full knowledge of that.
I just feel like the whole United squad's probably gotten a little bit worse since Amorim's taken over.
He seems like a nice guy. I think he's come in, he's over his head. Right, Sporting Lisbon, fine. This job is just humongous job, and it's not his mess, but he's got the mess.
Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of The Truth. I am not keeping track of which episode number it is, but I'm sure that my co-host Dougie Critchley is. Dougie, how many are we on?
It's number 25, and it's great to be back as well after missing the Bayern Munich episode last week as well. But yes, number 25, the quarter century, halfway to raising the bat.
There you go. How was your lovely week off last week?
It was very nice, thank you. It was very nice indeed. I went skiing in the south of France from Tuesday to Sunday. And yeah, after a day of rain, which I'd never had on the slopes before, the sun then came out. We had nice fresh snow. It was a great week, thoroughly enjoyable. But how are you guys doing?
Yeah, pretty good. I'm all right. And by you guys, you must mean myself and Voice of God producer Jack Collins, because he is also here. Hello, Jack.
Hello, Sam. Back in the producer's chair. Been demoted back to this side of the table, but it's good to be able to watch and witness from afar again.
Did not pass his probation.
No.
Was removed back down to grunt level.
You should see the comments.
Well, look, the way I would prefer to put it is it's a full house once again. A full complement. Lovely stuff. And we have all gathered here today to talk about Manchester United, to talk about Ruben Amorim, and to assess the accusations that you may have seen on social media that he has made them even worse than Erik ten Hag's final fluster in charge of United. So, look, clearly there's some pressure building here. And Dougie, last weekend there was a little war of words between Amorim and Wayne Rooney. Amorim said that the goal was to win the Premier League. Rooney said that was naive. I mean, to be fair to Amorim here, he's not actually saying he thinks they're going to win the Premier League. He's just saying that if you manage Manchester United, and if you are Manchester United, obviously the remit is to try and be competitive and win every game and win the big trophies. So probably wasn't talking about this season, but the very fact that this little exchange is happening between the current Man United manager and a genuine legend of the club who achieved so much, it's not the kind of noise you want, is it? When you're dealing with the fact that Man United right now look quite bad. So exactly how bad are they, Dougie? I mean, where do you want to start with this? What do we think?
Well, I think a phrase that you used just then was, we are gathered here today. And that instantly got me in the mind of, we're at a funeral. And To be totally honest, I think Man United in their previous guise have been dead for quite a while, but I think a lot of people thought Ruben Amorim was going to be the guy to bring them back to life. And it just really hasn't materialised. So he was appointed on the 11th of November, which already feels like a lifetime ago now. The guy walked in, top dog. He was a magnificent up-and-coming manager with Sporting, still unbeaten in the league that season. He came in and was supposed to revamp Man United, bring that style of play that was supposedly so absent under Erik ten Hag, a clear playing philosophy. He was the up-and-coming manager that everyone wanted. But he's won 10 of 24 games in charge. Now, the best win percentage of any United manager to take charge of more than 4 games since Fergie left is Mourinho's 58%. But I'm just going to run through the post-Fergie era. So Moyes is on 53%, Van Gaal 52%, Mourinho, as I said, 58%, Solskjaer 54%, Ralf Rangnick, leave it in the past, but he was still an interim, 38%, shocking. Ten Hag, 54%. Ruben Amorim is on 42%. By beating Ipswich Town 3-2 last week, United went unbeaten through 2 league games, unbeaten, not 2 straight wins, unbeaten, for the first time since Amorim's first 2 games in charge versus Ipswich and Everton. During his time in charge, United rank 15th for points won. Only the newly promoted sides and West Ham have scored fewer goals. Only the newly promoted sides, West Ham, Wolves, and Aston Villa, I'm afraid to say, Sam, have conceded more. They've lost 4-3 to Spurs in the Carabao Cup. They've been beaten by Fulham on penalties. I'm sure we'll hear the thoughts of Jack on that in due course. The only bright spot has been their Europa League campaign, where they finished 3rd and went unbeaten. But if you look below the surface, they still had to scrape past the likes of Victoria Pilsen and Rangers. And they are currently 14th. They are 9 points off 10th placed Aston Villa. I'm just going to say that again for emphasis. They are 9 points off 10th. So any sort of revival we expected to happen from Amorim's arrival in terms of an upturn in results just simply hasn't materialised, Sam.
Yeah, quick note for the listener, we're recording Wednesday evening, so they haven't played Real Sociedad yet, so Dougie's stat maybe 1 game out of date there, but it's still, by the time you listen to this, but it still tells a very clear story. That was quite damning, actually, Dougie. Like, I knew you'd have something for me. I wasn't sure exactly what, but I didn't think it would be that bad.
It is bad.
It's really bad. I mean, I think probably need to start by drawing a few lines in the sand here. You've done it quite well there across different Manchester United managers. I'll start with the question, are they worse than last season's Man United? Because I think you've got 2 sort of contrasting pieces of evidence here. On paper, and in the spirit of table don't lie, yeah, they're worse because last season they finished 8th, got 60 points, won the FA Cup. This year they're 14th, they have 33 points. I can't do maths, but that puts them on roughly on track for like 40, 42, which in a sort of old Premier League season, like a Tony Pulis era season, that is just about scraping clear of relegation. Like 40 points is the magic marker for you made it, well done. And they're on track to more or less get there. But, Dougie, do you remember how much time we spent last season talking about how bad Man United were? And despite the FA Cup, despite the fact that they were in a pretty good position in the league, they conceded 574 shots on goal, which was more than Sheffield United, who conceded 104 goals and set records. And they conceded the 3rd most XG of the entire season, only beaten in that sense, beaten in inverted commas, by Sheffield United and Luton. We were constantly left scratching our heads as to how on earth United were getting wins, getting results, doing whatever they needed to do, because they weren't very good. The eye test and the underlying numbers told you they weren't good, but the table and the trophy cabinet suggested they were. So I don't know where you stand on that, but do you think that this iteration of United right now, Amorim's Man United, 3-4 months in, do you think they're better or worse than what we saw last season under Erik ten Hag?
I think it's quite difficult to argue that they're better, but I wouldn't put that all on Amorim. Obviously, there's been 10 years of poor squad management. There have been tens of thousands of podcasts about Man United squad management over the last decade. So we don't need to get into the specifics of, Casemiro or a little bit of unluckiness with the likes of Mason Mount never getting fit, for example. There's been a change of ownership. They have tightened the belts financially. They are making a number of staff redundant. which cannot add to an atmosphere or a feeling of goodwill and positivity around the place. They quite literally know, Man United's players right now, that their performances, or lack of them at the moment, are costing local people their livelihood, which must be a huge amount of pressure. This idea that footballers don't care, I just don't buy it. Yes, they occasionally make mistakes. We all make mistakes. Footballers care, and they particularly care about the people that they see every single day. They might not care about fans' opinions, criticising them on social media, but Anna, who works in the front office, or Greg, who is one of the groundsmen who they come across every single day, they do build huge relationships with these people. That must have an effect as well. But I think the point about Amorim is that United last year couldn't defend, as those stats suggested. I don't think United can do anything particularly well right now, which I did think, over 3 months into the Ruben Amorim era, there would be some signs of progress. And United, I don't think, press very effectively right now. They don't control the lines between their defenders very well. They don't control the gaps between midfield and defence very well. That game against Everton, which, having been away for a week, was the last full 90 I've seen of Man United, there was about 7 or 8 attempts to clear the ball for one of the goals. The defending against Ipswich between Dougie and Onana. Onana, his drop-off, massive drop-offs as well. There's some inexcusable drop in individual performances, which I think is difficult to put down solely to Amorim and his coaching. But I think it's also difficult to put down solely to the players. There is a culture at Man United where very few players excel, and that's been a case for a long, long time. And we'll touch on it. But the departures of players like McTominay, Wan-Bissaka, Marcus Rashford now looks reborn at Aston Villa. Anthony looks great at Real Betis. That can't all be a coincidence. So I put this as much down to 10 years of hurt and distrust and underachievement at Man United than solely at the door of the manager.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that you don't think they'll do anything particularly well right now, and you would have expected something to go right, like one piece of his plan to fall into place. And Jack, I'll bring you in a second if you like, because you may have spotted something here that you think actually Amorim really is starting to install. But I've got a really horrible looking graph in front of me, which is one of those rolling XG and XGA graphs that you've probably seen. I can't show it to you, it's a podcast, but you've probably seen them on Twitter. You've probably looked at them and thought, well, they look disgusting. But the most important thing when you read them is that the bit between the dots is supposed to be blue and not red, because that would mean that your XG that you're creating is consistently higher than the XGA that you are allowing or conceding, which means you're good at attacking and you're good at defending. If it's red, if the lines are flipped, you're a bad team. And at the end of last season, Erik ten Hag's Man United were awful. They were like averaging about 2 XGA per game, 2 XG against per game, and only creating enough for 1 goal, which is a huge deficit. Now, at the start of this season, Ten Hag kind of managed to get that largely under control. Like, they were defensively clearly a lot better. I remember looking at the stats, maybe week 3, week 4, they were conceding 4 or 5 fewer shots per game than they were at the end of last season, which is a huge uptick. It's massively important, that. And under Amorim, it kind of carried on like that, but the gap has started to widen again. The XGA is starting to rise and the XG is starting to drop. There's not a lot of creative spark happening here. There's not a consistent goal threat, and the goals are starting to leak in as well. Some of the stuff like between Maguire and Onana and Dougie, like it blows my mind what I've watched actually over the last couple of weeks. But I also have to accept that I don't know how much time Ruben Amorim actually has here to install the plan when they've played a lot of games here, mate. Like, they're 26 games in. He's only been there 3 months. 3.5 months, whatever it is. It's tough. But yeah, Jack, is there anything that you see? You've seen more Amorim sporting than anybody that I know. Is there anything you can see here that's like started to translate?
I think there are elements of the system that suggest that certain players are starting to get it. And I think that he's a little bit unfortunate in that just as certain players are finally starting to live up to a little bit of their responsibilities, I thought that Matthijs de Ligt was excellent at the weekend. I thought there were shades and moments in the past couple of weeks where we've seen certain players be like, oh, you do fit that role. I think we've seen a little bit more of Joshua Zirkzee. I think Bruno is becoming that sort of one-man wrecking ball again. Not that that's necessarily a good thing for United as a whole, but I think that it's worth pointing out that he's starting to play.
He's playing really well. I think Bruno is doing great.
And so you kind of come to that and you're like, okay, so what is it? I thought that the Fulham United game was pretty even, if I'm honest. And I thought that the Fulham will be pleased that obviously they've come out the right side of that, exercised some of the demons of the past at Old Trafford. But generally, I thought it was a pretty level game that, went all the way to penalties and probably, should have done, right? Like they didn't feel like either side were much better than the other. Now, that's not where United want to be, but it is a position, and, Fulham weren't great that day and whatever. But I think if you're kind of like, okay, we're playing against teams at this point, like it's step by step, right? United can't go and compete with Liverpool and Arsenal right now because they're just nowhere near good enough. United need to build this back step by step. And I thought that the game against Fulham, actually both games I've watched against Fulham this year under Amorim, they felt like they've understood the assignment a little bit, both in the away game at Craven Cottage and then the home game here. Certain players are starting to get it. And I think he's a little bit unlucky that just as certain players are starting to pick up their roles, the likes of Manuel Ugarte is out again, right? Like, who I think is absolutely 100% crucial to the way this system works, because you need your central midfielders. If you're playing with a 2 against teams that play with 3 in the middle, you need your centre midfielders to be able to cover ground. And so we've seen in games where Eriksen and Casemiro are playing together that they just don't have that capacity. I've used this phrase before, but this is no system for old men. Like, this is a system that requires your midfielders to be doing the absolute utmost. And he's kind of had that at Sporting with a load of different players. Now, he's worked through different combinations in midfield. He's worked through different things, but you look at the players that came through there. Ugarte is one of them, but, Morita, Hjulmand, Palhinha, Mateusz Nunes. There were so many players in there that did different things, and they're not all the same type of player, right? But they've all learned how to do a role, and they all can cover ground.
Oh, they all can run.
That's the thing here. And I think that the entire system revolves around this midfield. And look, you can point to Amorim, and I'll flip a question back at you in a second. You can point to it and be like, well, if the system's not working for the players you have to adapt. And I absolutely take that argument. But I think that there is probably a level of this where you can change, and that's fine. But is there a point where United, and he said this, it's going to get worse before it gets better? You need to find players that are going to be able to do this. And we got a question on our Patreon post box on Monday from one of our patrons, Luke Shaw, not that one. Who said, are Manchester United proving that Ten Hag was right to not play his own style of football? Or are they doing the right thing now for the long term, even though they're really, really poor and they might finish as low as 17?
Yeah, just briefly before we go to that, you're talking about getting unlucky with certain injuries. Ahmad was the one that I was thinking, when you were talking about that. Like, there have been a couple that have really started to round into form, starting to look like a bit of a difference maker. Oh, looks like he could be a nice key piece for Amorim to lead on. Oh, Ahmad's gone down. It's happened a few times. And Man United are one of the hardest hit teams this season in the Premier League with regard to injuries. They've not had anything from Luke Shaw. Actually, that one. Lisandro Martinez is down again. Mason Mount got injured immediately. Like, these are all potentially very important players, and they're just not available. So it is quite difficult. But you have brought us on to a question that I think I was going to get round to anyway, which is, where do you sit on the argument? Like, you're forcing players, you're funneling players through a system, and you're not relenting on the system. Some say that's tactical consistency. Those are building blocks. That's important. Some say you've got to adapt. I guess it depends, Dougie, on whether or not you're imminently facing the sack, as to whether or not you have to hit the panic button and start adapting. And from my perspective, it doesn't look like he's anywhere near the sack, so he hasn't had to do that. Would that be your interpretation too?
Yeah, I don't think there'd be any benefit to sacking Amorim. I honestly wouldn't understand it whatsoever. It could get as bad as it could this year, short of United looking like they're going to get relegated, which is not going to happen, I don't think. There is literally no benefit. I think this season is such a lost season. You might as well instill in the players you are going to keep, your Ugartes, your Mainus, your Brunos. I would still keep Bruno. I know a lot of people online say they should cut their losses with Bruno. To me, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. You should still instill 6 months. Well, no, it'd be longer than that. It'd be 7-8 months by the time the season finishes of working in this system, in the hope that the players that you bring in the summer that are suited to this style, which is dramatically different from Erik ten Hag's and a dramatically different system, which United knew when they hired Amorim, by the way. There were managers that played more similarly to Ten Hag. that were out there at the time, a Marco Rosa, for example, etc. They went for Amorim. They knew that he has played this system since, I believe, his third game at Casapia. So he wasn't going to change. He wasn't going to change for anyone. Has it worked so far? No. I think the biggest concern is the confidence levels of some players that they have invested very heavily in over the last few years. And I'm not talking about Mason Mount, who can't get fit. I'm talking about Rasmus Højlund, brought in for vast amounts of money, their top goal scorer in all competitions last year. I think it was 16 goals in all comps. He's really, really, really struggled this year. He's got 2.5 XG to his name across the entire league campaign. 97 players have more total XG to their name. So he just hasn't been in a position to score a lot of goals. That is fewer XG than Fabio Carvalho, then Joe Aribo at Southampton, or Enes Unal, who has played 332 minutes for Bournemouth. Højlund's played over 1,300. Xerxes has 3.8 XG to their name. Neither of these guys are massively underperforming their XG. Højlund by 0.5, Xerxes by 0.8. They are just not getting chances. And it is so easy to go really hard on these really young players. Højlund's case only started regularly for 6 months for Atalanta, let's say. Xerxes, who had a phenomenal year at Bologna last year, but with all due respect to Bologna, the change from Bologna to Man United, absolutely massive. And I know he's got experience with Bayern Munich beforehand, of course, but still, huge step up in terms of pressure. There's been so much chopping and changing around them in terms of the players that they're trying to build relationships with, whether that's Ahmad getting injured, Rashford leaving the club, Garnacho almost leaving the club, staying at the club, etc. That these young players need time to find their feet at Old Trafford. What I thought was quite interesting was the other day, Rafael Varane, in a very interesting article and interview with The Athletic, came out and said that Ten Hag's strategy when he was at the club was to basically isolate one individual player, whether it was Ronaldo, whether it was Sancho, etc. He loved friction in the dressing room, and that was his style. And it didn't work for a number of those players. It didn't work for Varane. He said he had a very toxic relationship with him at points. But he also made
Sancho
the point
was one of these players,
for sure. And he also made the point, though, that Man United, in a different way to Real Madrid, and Real Madrid is a unique case where their plus 30-year-olds are some of the best players ever, in Modric and Kroos, for example. But their young players are really bedded in slowly and not expected to start for Real Madrid immediately. And you can see it this season with the likes of Endrick, for example. Varane made the point that Man United expect these players brought in, often on having overpaid, because Man United are always overcharged because they don't actually have maybe the smoothest football operation. I say maybe, definitely the smoothest football operation in terms of talent recruitment, etc. And they are expected to star in the Premier League immediately for the most intense club to play for in England. And Varane was like, this is not going to be conducive to good level performances. And if Varane's saying that, who's been inside the dressing room, he's probably hearing that from players, that they're just like, I am struggling in this environment. So Amorim has been left with a squad that has been poorly coached and looked out of touch in terms of style last year under Ten Hag, that was clearly unhappy with his sort of combative nature as well, and that has seen a number of key stars or previous key stars like Rashford leave during his time at the club. So I think Amorim's got a really, really difficult job. And I'm kind of with Jack and yourself that it's going to take potentially 2 years to fully settle and integrate his new style. But do Man United fans have the patience for that? I think we're seeing in the last few weeks that that's probably not the case.
Hello, Rag Squad. When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Aloe or Allbirds or Aviator Nation, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand and brilliant marketing, but an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the businesses, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, who are home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning that there are way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going. So, if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. It's no secret, businesses that want to grow with Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/ranks, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/ranks to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/ranks.
My amazing new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra reduces noise in my concert videos with Galaxy AI, taking them from this to this. Now I have time to bejewel my favorite artists' faces onto jackets. This one really captures their eyes.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that reduces distractions so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with common video formats, accessible in gallery. Helps minimize 6 select sounds. Results vary. Galaxy AI features by Samsung free through 2025.
There are some things in life that just shouldn't be forgotten. Like bringing your keys when you leave the house, setting your fantasy lineup, and most importantly, having Hidden Valley Ranch to watch the game. Especially if wings are on the menu. Those creamy, zesty, Cool Ranch flavors take each spicy, savory bite to an unforgettable level. Hidden Valley Ranch, only serious about flavor.
Now, I think a point in Amorim's favour here is I actually think the way he handles his young players is to be applauded. I think his persona and his sort of character with the media and the way he talks to people, engage the local media, the Beat, they seem to love him, right? And this is a strength. This is a skill. Erik ten Hag did not have this skill, and if you don't have this skill, then you are going to suffer when it's really, really bad. But sometimes, if you can charm someone, then you get yourself. You buy yourself a little bit of time, you buy yourself a little bit of patience. And I think Amorim has done a really good job of kind of just explaining it all the way, being direct where necessary, but also protecting his players. And I always look at his teams and I think there's no way that's the 11 you actually want to put out. But he's got a lot of players here who are, if he wasn't taking care of them, they would have been completely and utterly overworked this season. And he is making sure that they don't completely and utterly burn out. Now, obviously, in some cases, like Rasmus Højlund, it's not really manifesting in goals. But the way he's taking care of guys like Garnacho and Ahmad, unfortunately, he got injured, but that wasn't a burnout issue. I have to applaud the way he's actually he's managed to integrate these players. He's taken a lot of pressure off Kobbie Mainoo, which I think was really important because under Ten Hag, there was a one-man midfield and it was a 19-year-old. This is not healthy. So I feel like very slowly he is starting to put these steps in place and these things in place for things to start improving in the future. But he's found himself in a hole because ultimately when you take over a club in November, it's because it hasn't gone well. And the idea that it gets worse before it gets better, that's probably fair in that regard. Jack, you talked about, someone like Bruno Fernandes playing really, really well for Amorim. And I agree. I think he's been a bit of a superstar, really, in terms of dragging them through recent games. Sometimes they look completely offensively anemic, and then Bruno turns up. What Dalot has had to run through here and get through in terms of minutes, it's pretty criminal, but he has to do it. And they are, you certainly get the impression that these players are playing for Amorim. They are more than happy with him. It's just that they weren't really able to refresh the squad or add too much quality or even add anyone who fits the system because of the financial constraints that left you with, a 20-year-old left back from Lecce as your only January signing.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. But there is also, I think, some signs of friction still. And look, I'm a huge Amorim fan. I loved what he did with Sporting. And I said that, if anyone could come in and turn around a club on fire, then it was him. You look at what he took over. It was known as the managerial graveyard, Sporting, when he took over. There were fans invading the training center and beating up players, right? This was real, as bad as it gets. And whilst United is a bigger behemoth and has more issues, perhaps financially, etc., there is that element that I always come back to. I didn't there was a moment with Bruno in a post-match interview recently where he basically said, well, the manager wants to play this style for some reason. And I was like, oh, God. And it's one of those where I was like, I can't tell if this is just something that's slightly lost in translation. There are certain phrases that don't necessarily quite work all the way, right? And I spend a lot of time with people who are Portuguese speaking English, and there are certain ticks that they use that I found that aren't quite they don't necessarily add up to what a native speaker would say. And so I wonder if there is just an element of that, but it wasn't a great use of phrase. And he's like, if the manager wants to play like this for some reason, then, that's how we're going to play. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I like that very much at all. I do understand that Bruno is being sort of shunted between positions and that he's probably not all that pleased. He probably wants to play in one of those more forward roles where he can create and destroy and make things happen. But I wonder if right now he's just having to be shifted back into the midfield because there is no one else who's going to run. And for all the criticism that Bruno gets, I feel like the one that's the most unfair is that some people are like, he doesn't work hard. Like Bruno runs like a dog. And there is an element of this. I think he would be better used further up in the same way that Pedro Gonçalves was at Sporting, who is literally known as mini Bruno at times. But there was a reason that sometimes he'd have to drop into that midfield, and it's because they need legs and creativity in there. And right now they don't have much of either. And Bruno is able to provide both from a deeper role where they have options in the front three.
Yeah, and to be fair, if he was a bit higher up, he'd be able to lead the press a bit better, and they might be a bit better defensively, top to bottom, as a result. It could easily happen. Look, I spent a bit of time here defending Amorim, and we've kind of offered some mitigating factors here. I think the lack of attacking spark is obviously not his fault. Like, he's got the squad that he's got. He was not really given the opportunity to add to it in January. But Dougie, you touched on something earlier that I just want to dig into a little bit more. Andre Onana, what's going on here? What's happened? When we talked about the end of last season with Ten Hag and all those shots that they were giving up per game, like 19, 20, 21 shots, and asking, how did you not lost that game? The answer was actually possibly Andre Onana, because he, in the Champions League, had a disaster. But in the Premier League, he put together a really good, kind of under the radar season. This is not really happening for him right now. There's what feels like, I'm going to use the word capitulation, because I think it's actually, that would be probably the way to capture what I'm watching right now. It's bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really not been good at all. And it is crazy to think that we're just under 2 years from his performance in a Champions League final for Inter Milan against Man City that had people saying, we hadn't seen such a maverick and interesting goalkeeping performance since sort of Neuer burst onto the scene. It really was. It did feel quite fresh. He was popping balls he was being in midfield almost at points, and he was so progressive with his passing. Man United have never used him in that way, I think it's fair to say. But he's always been a little bit of a maverick, and he does things a little bit differently to most players. It has never felt like his communication with his backline is a real strength, and we've seen notable mistakes between him and Dougie in recent weeks, etc.
And Maguire, the Beto goal was just horrific.
It was absolute chaos. And I think his penalty saving technique, I know it's a small thing, but he's diving so early, man. Just like...
It's so weird, because he was also quite good in that game, and then suddenly he just completely forgot how to save penalties. It was really odd.
It's weird.
Case of the Jan Oblak's kicking in, unfortunately. Yeah. Oblak's fine now, but you remember for a while he just went jelly legs.
Yeah, and you just don't want the bozo gene in your goalkeeper, and it does feel like he's got it at the moment. And look, I'm not writing him off in terms of he'll never work at a top club, etc. But right now he is one of a number of key players in that spine of that team that aren't performing to the level that you'd expect of them as well. It's the thing I'd say about Amorim is that despite the chaos in results and off the pitch matters, you cannot say that he's not trying things. He has used 28 players since taking over. There have been a number of players, Bruno, Dalot, Mazraoui, Højlund, Garnacho, Xerxes, Ugarte, Onana, De Ligt, Diallo, have all made 20 plus. But then there's the likes of Eriksen, Casemiro, Mainu, Lissandro, Yoro, Maguire, all made 10 to 19. But then there's like Lindelof has been used, Evans has been used, Collier's been used. You've even started using Aidan Heaven, Chido Obi Martin's been used as well. You cannot say that he is not trying everything to try and get players more suited to his system into the side. But I do think this chopping and changing can't be helping with relationships as well. And it does feel like a system that does require a certain, not necessarily telepathy, but the links and communication between players is obviously vital. It's obviously vital. And that Sporting team that he started the season with, bar a few changes maybe behind the striker about who was going to play alongside Gonçalves and behind Gyökeres, you could kind of name the entire 11. And it would rarely change. He kind of used 13, 14 players. And that to me says that he's either sending a message to the ownership structure that he's literally trying everything and he's, giving everyone a fair shot at it, or that there are certain players that just aren't suited to this system whatsoever and probably do need to be moved on this summer. The issue is, if you're finishing 14th, 15th in the league, I think it's very, very, very difficult to imagine United winning the Europa League as they're currently performing. It's almost impossible to, despite the fact that Real Sociedad are also having a really difficult season as well. I still make them favourites for that tie. Maybe it's aged badly on the back of last night's result. Let's see. But it is very difficult to imagine United having any form of European football next year. Who wants to join a club that is this lost? And recruitment for Man United, I think their name has been so crucial to the names they've managed to attract in recent years. Like even last summer, Lenny Yoro, I'm not having a bad word said about his form last year for Lille, clearly one of the most exciting talents in Ligue 1. Matthias de Ligt, yes, he's maybe not turned into the player that people expected, but he was still worth, 140 million euros to Juventus and Bayern Munich combined. Mazraoui has Champions League experience with Ajax. He was a really useful addition at Bayern Munich. Probably just injuries robbed him of his time there. Joshua Zirkzee was Serie A Young Player of the Year. United have not signed bad players, but players that have consistently come in that people are excited about have just not hit the ground running as you'd expect at this club. And the standard and the raise that players have had on leaving Old Trafford just speaks to a really terrible environment. So Amorim needs to be a clear root and branch sort of de-rot of the entire club. And Amorim feels like a very, very good coach to do that. I just think United fans just need to ride it out. As rough as that is right now, just really, really ride it out, because you do have one of the most exciting managers in Europe and you don't become this poor overnight.
Just on the point of using all those players, it is a signal that he's willing to try stuff. I also just think it's a byproduct of the fact that they do have to play this many games. And we're talking about 25, 26 games over the course of 3.5, 4 months here. It is a game every 3.5 days. They've been in the cups. They've been in 3 cups. The Premier League schedule is a nightmare. It's absolutely killing teams. How much time does Ruben Amorim get on the training ground to actually work with these players? Probably not very much time at all, unfortunately. We're talking about this kind of bedding in time, but even that is limited. Even over the course of 3.5 to 4 months, the training time is actually the game time. The games that Man United are playing are basically like their training sessions, because they're learning a system and they're bedding in, but they don't have time to actually train for it. You listen to any footballer post-match these days, and if they ever get asked about a question about training, they all just reply with, well, we don't really do any training, so I wouldn't really know. The one that sticks in my mind is Yuri Tielemans last week. Obviously was asked, Marco Asensio, Marcus Rashford, what are they like in training? It must have been a great to watch that. He just went, well, we don't really do any training, so I wouldn't really know. There's no time. There is no time. And you always hear managers talk about how important that summer is, that pre-season is. It's not just one of those verbal crutches that they use. That is actually the time that you get to bed in and you get to teach and train these players. So he is mitigating a difficult situation here with a load of players and a load of games and a load of injuries and a lack of investment and a really bad culture and atmosphere around the club. When you put it like that, you do have to accept that it probably was always going to end up looking like this. There was a big part of me, honestly, that thought that he was so smooth, so suave, and so cool that he would actually just turn it around immediately and everyone would just rise. But clearly, that is unrealistic because the source of the problems runs so incredibly deep. I have one final point to make, which is a parallel that I'd like to draw up. But before I do that, are there any closing remarks, Dougie, or from yourself, Jack?
It's almost quite a sad note to end on, but I just thought it was notable when I saw it. So he's currently on 1.1 points per game. That's the same as Jesse Marsh at Leeds. It's worse than Roy Keane at Sunderland. It's worse than Steven Gerrard at Villa. It's worse than Steve McLaren across his time in the Premier League. For all we've said and all the stipulations and reasons behind the struggle, it is, I think United fans, we'd be doing it a disservice to not paint the full picture of how historically bad their current run of form is. And it should be acknowledged that it has been dreadful. It has been really dreadful. And yes, there are extenuating circumstances, but I would have expected more.
Yeah, I would probably concur. I think it is where I'm at with it. Like, you go back a few months, right? And after that game against Liverpool, the 2-2 draw, all of the headlines were like, oh, okay, these are the first green shoots of Amorim's tenure, the first real signs that there's something to cling on to. I think actually more than the game against Manchester City, because that felt a bit like a smash and grab. And, City haven't been great this season anyway. That one against Liverpool, you're like, okay, they competed in that game. Yeah, okay, they were overwhelmed a bit first half, but they competed and they had opportunities to go and win that game. And after that game, I remember Bruno saying in the interview, it can't just be the big games that we turn up for. It has to be week in, week out. And since that's kind of like the high water point, right? Like that's where the tide rolled back. And the fact that it hasn't gone, perfectly since then, yes, has to do with injuries and yes, has to do with different bits and bobs. But I do think that there's something in that. United need to recognize. And one of the reasons I was really pro Amorim is because I thought United needed to recognize that ultimately they are where they are right now, right? Like, and maybe this league position is slightly false, but it isn't that false. Right, like in terms of where they are and in terms of where they are as a club. I'm not talking about one season off. They're not going to get relegated. They might finish 17th. That would be a false position. But they are not a club that is going to be challenging for the Champions League right now, unless they change. And I think that when you put it in that context, getting a manager who understands that sometimes you have to play against the ball. We saw that with Sporting and Amorim when they played against Manchester City in the Champions League and the way that they played in transition, but also the fact that they were able to be dominant domestically as well. I was like, okay, that's a manager who can go both ways. And that's what United need. United don't need someone who's going to come in and be like, yeah, we're going to dominate the ball. We're going to outplay Liverpool, outplay Arsenal, outplay Man City. Because they don't have that. They don't have that squad. And ultimately, they need to find someone who is going to grind them back through, learning how to be a team again, learning how to play in different ways and getting a different style going on at Manchester United, which isn't, a Pep regen, which isn't going to work right now. And so that was why I always had faith in Amorim. But it is becoming increasingly hard to justify that faith with the results that are happening. Again, I think they played okay at the weekend against Fulham. I think there are certain signs that there are bits and bobs coming to life with Manchester United. But I think that time isn't running out in terms of they're going to sack him this season. I don't think they will. But you need to kind of bed in some goodwill. Otherwise, a bad start to next season, and we're going to have exactly the same issue going on where they'll sack him in October, bring in someone else who also won't get a preseason, and then you're kind of going round and round in circles. I think he deserves a shot, and I think that United will give him that shot. But right now, he really, really needs to start turning things around.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it's fair to point to lots of mitigating factors here: squad building, toxic atmosphere, injury lists, fixture congestion, all that. I think it's very fair to point to all of those as mitigating factors and say, well, how much can you do? I think it's also very fair to say, why didn't you build on that Liverpool draw? And why were you able to knock Arsenal out of the FA Cup, but then stunk the place out against Southampton and got away with it? What else happened? I mean, they've beaten Leicester and Ipswich recently by the skin of their teeth. The Leicester win. Leicester are awful. And they beat Leicester because VAR wasn't on. That is the reason that they actually managed to get through that game. Harry Maguire's header was offside in the 93rd minute, and they got lucky. These performances and these results, they are not good enough. They
scraped a win against Fulham as well, which was horrible.
Yeah, precisely. So it's also very fair to ask, why is this still happening 4 months in? Because the caliber of teams that I've just mentioned there, bar Fulham, I've talked about the bottom three there, the ironclad, these three teams are going down. They are much worse than the rest of the league. And United are barely able to beat them at home, all three of them. So that in itself is a fair question. So I guess ultimately the truth is somewhere in the middle there, lads. But I will end with the parallel. I'll be interested to see how you both react to this, because this piqued my interest. It's passed forward from friend of the pod, Aaron Moniz, who is a fantastic podcaster and writer and supports Manchester United and has been on Ranks once or twice. And he has compared early Man United, Amorim Man United, to early Arteta Arsenal. Now, the reason for this is because, I don't know if you remember, but it was a while ago. But the early Arteta reign at Arsenal, it had a structure, it clearly had an idea and a vision. Like, you could obviously see what he was trying to do. It wasn't jumbled. It wasn't blurry. You could see what he wanted to do, but he was working through a difficult situation in which the squad really wasn't good enough. And he kind of had to get through the Lacazette, the Aubameyang, the Kolasinac contracts in order to steadily rebuild the squad. He was given the time and he was given the patience in order to do that. It was about 18 months until they were particularly competitive. And then they got good, and then they got really good, and then they got to a 90-point caliber. Is that too optimistic to say that what we're witnessing right here is the very early stages of that process, and that sometimes you just have to recognize that? Because there's part of me that really does see the parallel. There's also part of me that thinks even that Arsenal team wasn't struggling to beat, an 11-point Southampton team.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. That Arteta side were never down in 15th in points won across 20 games under Amorim. Look, I see your point. I do think it's going to take quite a few windows to make it better, and I like the fact that I don't think he's really put a foot wrong in the media as well. It'd be very easy to say, "Oh, I don't know about these players." He's not really done that. I think he's stuck by them. I think he's generally been very positive, which kind of takes us back to the start of the podcast. Like, he should be talking about Man United winning league titles in the future. And to be fair to Rooney, having watched the video, Rooney did a lot of contextualizing around that and said, I think that sounds a little bit naive. It was blown up because it's Man United and it's Man United's record goal scorer, one of their best ever players, talking about the current Man United boss. But I don't think either of them were massively in the wrong. Amorim should aim high. United need a huge summer, but I do have my concerns about whether they'll be able to do an effective Arteta Arsenal-style rebuild and attract the players they need to when there are just way more attractive clubs to join in the Premier League right now.
There you have it. I think that's a very fair way to end it. There is a distinct chance. There is a distinct chance that Amorim is able to complete this rebuild for Man United and reap incredible benefits from it. Because if you are the man to transform Man United, to bring them out of the doldrums, modernise them and make them an excellent football team again, that would be an incredible feeling, and it would be an incredible feat for the manager in question. Unfortunately, it might kill him before he gets to reap the rewards. So we'll have to see how he handles all of that. But that's everything from us, guys. So nothing left for me to do other than say, Dougie, thank you for joining me. It was good to have you back.
Thank you very much, Sam. Great to be here.
Yeah, and Jack, thank you for chiming in as ever. Congratulations on your progression in the FA Cup.
Thank you very much, Sam. Appreciate it. And good to see you both back together and smiling.
Yeah, thank you to the listener. Appreciate you. And we'll catch you next week. Don't know what it's about yet, but I'm sure that Dougie will cook up a fantastic subject once again for us all to get our teeth into. See you later.
Hello, Rag Squad. When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Allo or Allbirds or Aviator Nation, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand and brilliant marketing, but an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the businesses, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, who are home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning that there are way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going. So, if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. It's no secret, businesses that want to grow with Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/ranks, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/ranks to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/ranks.
My amazing new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra reduces noise in my concert videos with Galaxy AI, taking them from this to this. Now I have time to bejewel my favorite artists' faces onto jackets. This one really captures their eyes.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that reduces distractions so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with common video formats, accessible in gallery, helps minimize 6 select sounds. Results vary. Galaxy AI features by Samsung free through 2025.
There are some things in life that just shouldn't be forgotten, like bringing your keys when you leave the house, setting your fantasy lineup, and most importantly, having Hidden Valley Ranch to watch the game. Especially if wings are on the menu. Those creamy, zesty Cool Ranch flavors take each spicy, savory bite to an unforgettable level. Hidden Valley Ranch, only serious about flavor.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Commercial Insurance. Business owners meet Progressive Insurance. They make it easy to get discounts on commercial auto insurance and find coverages to grow with your business. Quote in as little as 7 minutes at progressivecommercial.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company. Coverage provided and serviced by affiliated and third-party insurers. Discounts and coverage selections not available in all states or situations.